All right. Hello, everyone. This is the weekly product and design and UX research sync call for the editor group. So we'll jump right into the agenda. I want to leave as much time as possible for design and research because that's the crux of what I think has been going on. But one thing I did want to chat with you, Michael, about was in relation to the UX OKR around improving our SUS score. I guess, Catherine, this is relevant to you too, but I think the ask was for me to prioritize issues on this list. We don't actually have that many that were on that that first pass from the UX team that included the label that would qualify for this OKR. So we discussed on a product call earlier this week that we should go back and retroactively look at 13.6 and anything we have already prioritized for 13.7 and see if we would classify any of those. We can do this async, but Michael, if you could just look at the ones I suggested or any of the links in the agenda to some searches that filter just our issues and see if you think they qualify for the OKR. Catherine, you could do the same because it's about SUS. If you know what would be qualified as a SUS driver and system usability score so I'm not using acronyms, but the gist of it is we want to try and close as many of these as we can. The OKR, I believe, has a finite number that we're trying to close or a defined number. Obviously, if we could help exceed that by saying that we addressed usability on our own, that would be great. And I'll try and prioritize at least one or two in 13.8. Some of the stuff we're doing on settings and nav anyway was on the list. So hopefully we'll be able to address those. Similarly, we can discuss this async, but I had posted in Slack a proposed structure for our epics and categories and trying to organize all this. There's a lot. I'm basing it heavily off of what we did for static site editor, and I thought that worked pretty well. But one of the questions was whether or not it even makes sense to have an epic or issues related to customer insights, or if your preference would be to keep that all in Dovetail anyway. Do you think it's worth having something per category to create confidential issues about user feed interviews, or should that all just live in one place anyway?
So with the insights, what that usually comes out of as actionable insights from the Dovetail studies. So those exist in doing solution validation or problem validation, and the outcomes of those to force people to take action rather than just leaving them in Dovetail. What the research team has suggested is converting those insights, insights that you're going to do something on or iterate on, those become actionable insights. So there's a label for actionable insights. And I don't know how that kind of fits in with this, because it'd be let's say it's improve XYZ. So whether that goes in insights, like an explicit epic, we might not need that. It might just be bucketed under something else, but it gets tagged. So how that gets surfaced, that's probably a different question. Are you looking at this as a board? And if so, then maybe if you have your web ID group as your primary filter, then this is just a label. But I don't think they're...
Yeah. So I guess I was thinking that makes a lot of sense. I guess the way I hoped to use it for static site editor was more like if I end up having a call with a customer or a user or even an internal, GitLab team member that has been using the static site editor, I would document the conversation or any notes I took, maybe even link to the video or something like that. And it feels like I should just be putting that in Dovetail and then making issues for any actionable insights from that. Because Dovetail would do the transcribing, it's going to be more universally searchable. And Yeah, I mean, I guess in the worst case, if we ever move away from Dovetail, we can export and create issues for individual like pages from there. So I'll probably not push too hard to have that as a separate like part of our structure in our categories, and try it. And if I ever need it again, we'll revisit.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I've seen
I
it.
think that makes sense.
Yeah, I've seen it done both ways. And I personally, yeah, would recommend the dovetail approach because I like the tagging and how you can organize and then get the transcription. But it's also fine if you want to keep it in GitLab as well. We don't, at least the research team doesn't have a
Okay.
policy one way or another.
I'd like to get better at using Dovetail, and I'd also like to talk to a lot more customers. So I'd like to kind of tackle those goals both at the same time, and keep it consolidated, especially when it comes to like potentially those interviews serving as problem validation or something like that, where we might want to organize them differently. So anyway, we can move on from that. That answers my question. I'll turn it over to Michael and Catherine to talk about research and design efforts. Mostly, it looks like Chad's got a great question that I meant to answer in Slack. So I'm done talking. Take over.
Already
right.
to this one, I wasn't following.
Since you're off mute, just you can vocalize your comment, and then we can jump to mine after.
Okay, sure. So yeah, you asked about once we add snowplow metrics, where do they show up? And this is actually a question I have too, because I'm hopefully finally going to get soon merge the EMR where I'm adding new ones around the projects and groups drop down. And yeah, when I asked a lot of people, they mostly said, well, yeah, the product managers usually just make some dashboards to show this stuff. So I don't know if there's already some or we need to make them. And if we need to make them, there should probably be some planning around that, like different ones for the different areas of focus that our group has. And I think I have, enough experience in Sense and then some examples to help do that. Other people on the team don't, but I just need to know what direction to go in and if we already have one.
Okay, cool. The answer to this then is we probably have to make it ourselves, because I remember that when the growth team was looking at the top navigation and they were like adding all the like tracking on that, they added all the tracking and there was a separate issue to create an analytics dashboard on top of that. I was just curious whether that was already created, or like how do I jump in and add like the additional more button, which is something that Derek looked at. So I was like, oh, okay, maybe we can start looking at some of those stats. But off the back of that, I'll try to find that issue and I'll ping you on that one, Chad. And then Eric, yeah, I agree. We probably have to set aside some time in like a milestone to say, okay, like during this milestone, let's take a look at this, whether that's done by you, Chad, or Eric or myself. I think that's up for grabs for everyone. But yeah, because that would be really helpful for cross-referencing some of the stuff that we're doing with the top nav, like whatever changes we're planning to do.
And I think that'll be a good opportunity to get some more clarity around what exactly we're asking for and what we can and can't get. Because, for example, user identifying metrics are hard. Getting stuff from on-prem is harder. It's like a whole different system. And there's like, how do we present these? Like, are they aggregated over what period of time and what areas? Sometimes we may want to like pull in existing metrics that are already there. Like I know there's still that the growth team has instrumented some stuff on around various areas of navs.
Cool.
I was going to answer your question in Slack. I'll do it now, but the answer that you gave is correct, that we probably will have to do it ourselves. I can ask the growth team if they ever instrumented it. I found a link to this work in progress Periscope dashboard that, or Sisense dashboard that I don't have access to, or is just going to their homepage. So maybe they deleted the dashboard and created a new one. If it doesn't already exist, we will have to create one. I have a SQL book on my shelf because it's not my strong suit. I need to brush up on it and see if I can figure out how I can kind of run these queries on my own. But you know, we do have some existing dashboards for other categories like snippets, and obviously we had one for static site editor, and there's one for web IDE. So for those categories, as we instrument things, we will probably add to existing dashboards, but I don't know if there's one already for like the nav.
And feel free to reach out to me for help on this SQL if you need it. What I found, like when I've cargo culted like some other ones that are similar to what I want, the queries are sometimes way more complicated than they need to be. So you can, it helps to simplify them before we start cleaning.
Yeah, thanks. I will certainly bother you with troubleshooting my queries when I get around to it.
Cool. I'll take that as covered. And then the point that I had was like for the key results around this improving settings and navigation for this quarter, I gave an update on that issue, and I addressed some of the, like probably the concerns from senior stakeholders around movements of issues. At the moment, I couldn't find any that we officially closed as part of settings and navigation. If I'm wrong about that, please feel free to correct me, and then we can change that number. But I think we're still doing a lot of good work in the background setting up for like 13.8. So I think I think the rest of the month we'll handle some of the UX research and UX work, which will pave way for more executional development work. Because I think we're still deciding what we want to do, and that's why we're doing solution validation that starts next week on the top nav, and we're setting up some stuff for settings, which we had a discussion earlier this week, Eric and myself and Roman, and Catherine and I separately about the kind of the general direction. And the goal for me start of next week is probably formalizing some of that stuff and then getting feedback from designers, but also starting recruitment for the settings solution validation. So with Christmas coming in, I think like we're not going to hit all our key results, which is fine. But yeah, with holidays coming up, I think that we're just going to have a few days, if a bit of time where it's going to be hard to coordinate or like, yeah, make some moves on that. But I'm not too stressed about it. It's just like an FYI, and I think we're making the right moves, especially with the background work and investigating stuff, because I think we got burnt by thinking some issues are easy, but really they proved to be a lot harder than or a little bit more complex than we imagined. And I think that's fine. A case in point is like that frequently visited thing that probably opened up the more conversation of like, should we be using recently viewed projects, and then like where should we use them? And it actually opened up a lot of doors and opportunities elsewhere in the product to potentially solve some other 3-year-old problems. So
that sounds great. And we were actually just discussing before you joined, Catherine and I, about usertesting.com, and if we can in any way use that to speed up our recruitment and get these through. Hopefully, you know, there's at least a few people on there that aren't taking time off for the holidays, but totally understandable if it slows down a little bit. I'm glad that we're getting ready to start next week. I think the goal in my mind is like, let's get as much as we can, as many insights as we can in 13.7, so that we have some actionable work we can schedule for 13.8, at least, to begin work in 13.8, right? Like even if we can't ship something fully, hopefully at least one part of the solution validation that you run is like a clear win, and we can just chip away at them. Because obviously you're testing a lot of really amazing things. We're going to need to break them down into iterative, releases anyway. So maybe there's like one iteration that we can get in 13.8.
Totally agree.
Yeah, and I guess piggybacking off of that, I also am moving to pick up the speed again next week because I had a very big drop off in time for settings and nav, kind of working on SUS and usability KR work, but that is wrapping up. So what I'm hoping to do is get recruiting moving. We have some people trickling in, but I'm not sure how many have scheduled yet with Michael. And then I also need to schedule my own. So getting recruiting moving, and then it should be pretty straightforward, at least for the moderated ones, run the sessions, analyze the results. So I'm still feeling that it will be wrapped up by end of 13.7, but I'll let you know if it'll slip.
Sounds great.
So I just wanted to add on, like you said, that snowplow link that you had was broken. So I added in the one that I had put in the Slack thread, and it's another one that Doug Stahl from the growth group had pointed me to. I don't think it may be related to anything we want, but it is something that is pulling snowplow data. And in my experience, like just finding the right tables to pull the data from is like 90% of the battle. So even if that's not the right events, it at least tells us where to find the events. And after that, it should be pretty easy to write whatever we want.
Yeah, that's awesome. Thanks. Most of my work in writing any code comes from starting from someone else's and replacing variables and events, because I need that template. That'll help a lot.
Yeah, there's just like hundreds of these tables with no description or data dictionary that I know of in snowplow, and it's just figuring out the right ones to look in.
Cool. Well, I think that's about it for the agenda. Anything else? So our weekly call this week on the editor group was our social one. So there wasn't anything to carry over to discuss, like tactically. I think the only thing to chat about, I guess, Michael, is we're probably going to try and get ahead of the game with 13.8 and 13.9 planning wise, and because Roman's going to be taking some time off around the holidays, the rest of his paternity leave. So we'll probably be chatting more about that in the next week or so to make sure everybody knows what the priorities are, and then that'll be a good chance for us to fill in presumptions about what kind of work we might pick up in 13.8 and 13.9.
Okay, cool. Let me jump in here and question something. So earlier this week, we talked about some of the settings, kind of standardization of patterns. And one of the areas that we identified as a potential candidate to like demonstrate updating the patterns and guidelines was the merge request page. And for different reasons around sus scores. No, sorry. When I use the word sus, it sounds like suspicious instead of like system usability. So that's why I'm cracking up. Yeah. So chatting to Catherine yesterday, another potential area would be repository. So that in itself has like kind of like a existing standalone area in the page of settings. So if you go to settings, it's already its own thing. So that could be another potential candidate of exercising some of our patterns in a potentially safer environment because it's less moving parts because it's already isolated, but it still would have high enough impact on the sus scores because in the feedback, because of the over-indexing on the crate and kind of core repository and merge requests usage, like that could be another area that we demonstrate some of the best practices. So a candidate here is like starting to remove the expand collapse to adopt some of these other patterns. So then that could be something that could be done with not too much risk compared to merge requests where we potentially would be moving it out of different areas and adding new links. And repository is still highly impactful, but lives in its own little world. I was planning to create an issue similarly to the merge request one to illustrate this. So I'll do that over the next few days, and hopefully that will, I'll ping you enrollment on that for your eyes and your consideration for something to do in 13.8.
Yeah, sounds great. All right. Well, thank you for running me through all that. I am excited to see the outcomes of this research. So, yeah, and I'm also going to try and wrap my head more around the other categories that we should be focused on for this. But I know that's, as far as syncing between us, this research on settings and nav is probably the most relevant thing to talk about. It should be noted, though, for the recording that we are doing great work in all the other categories. Just not a lot of research going on right now in those. So, yeah, I'm looking forward to when we can do some research in those, especially in the rich text editing and potentially adding that into other editing experiences. So, I guess that's about it. Have a good rest of the day, everyone. I will talk to you soon. Thanks.
All right.
Yeah.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.
Bye.